Hello everyone. In this third video, I'd like to talk about the 5 sermons or discourses of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. As I said earlier, this Gospel very much focuses on Jesus of Nazareth as a teacher. And so through the 5 teachings, we get to the core of the Gospel message. We begin in Matthew chapter 5. Notice how the evangelist sets the scene. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain. And after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them. It's a perfect description of Jesus the teacher, with his disciples and the crowd ready to hear what he has to say. And so he begins, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." With these 8 Beatitudes, he provides us with a basic picture of what kind of community he wishes to establish on earth. A place for the poor, for the meek, for the merciful, for peacemakers, for those who suffer for justice. He goes on to talk about not abolishing the Jewish law, but fulfilling it. He reinterprets the law, no longer an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, but a call to radical reconciliation, a call to reconcile with a brother or sister, to avoid sinning even in the heart, to love your enemies. He teaches a way to pray. It's in the Sermon on the Mount that we find the Lord's Prayer. He teaches us how to fast, how to give alms. He tells us to seek first the kingdom, and all else will be given to us. And finally, a parable. Those who hear these words and act on them are like someone who builds his house on a foundation of rock. Christians have striven for centuries to put the Sermon on the Mount into practice, not always successfully, far from it. But it is a blueprint for the community of faith. I call it the constitution of the church. The second sermon is found in Matthew chapter 10. It immediately follows the call of the 12 disciples, where each is named. Some scholars refer to this as the mission discourse. He calls his disciples to reach out to the lost sheep of the tribe of Israel, those who had forgotten the covenant. They were called to proclaim that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, to heal the sick, to raise the dead, to take no money for the journey, to accept whatever charity comes their way. They need to be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. He tells them to proclaim this gospel from the rooftops, but that they will be persecuted for doing it, and that they need to endure to the end. They will lose family and friends, but to those who receive this message, the good news, there will be a great reward. The third sermon, found in chapter 13, consists of a series of 7 parables about the kingdom of heaven. 4 are given outdoors from a boat on the Sea of Galilee. Then 3 are given indoors, and the last 3 only to the disciples. First, the parable of the sower and the seed. The seed that falls in different places, but only the seed in good soil bears fruit. Later, he explains the parable, how seed falling in unfavorable ground is like the word of the kingdom being heard by people who are unable to fully receive it. In another parable, he speaks of good seed planted in the soil, but then contaminated with weeds planted by an enemy. The master instructs his workers to let both weed and wheat grow together until the time of harvest, where they will be separated. It's a parable to explain the sad reality of sin and corruption within the church. Sadly, something we are all too aware of, but with the promise of a final reckoning. Gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. There are other parables, that of the mustard seed, the smallest of seeds that grows into a great tree, and that of a woman adding yeast to dough until it is all leavened, or a man who, finding a pearl of great price, spends all he has to purchase the field in which he found it, or a fisherman's net thrown into the sea that catches every kind of fish. The fourth sermon is found in chapter 18. It is a series of teachings on the church, the new community of believers founded on Peter's confession of faith, which we will talk about in our next video. He begins with the parable of the lost sheep and how the shepherd goes off in search of it, More joy, Jesus says, over one lost sheep returned than over 99 that have never gone astray. Then a teaching on reconciliation with a brother or a sister who has gone astray. To first confront the person alone, and if that does not succeed, then bring one or two witnesses, and if that doesn't succeed, then bring the matter before the community, the church. Then we find the teaching that had been first directed to Peter, now directed to the whole group of believers. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. This is the power of the keys, the gift of sacramental reconciliation given to the church. Continuing the theme of forgiveness, Jesus then teaches the parable of the master forgiving a servant's gigantic debt. But in turn, the servant refusing to forgive a fellow servant a smaller debt. It's an illustration of what we pray in the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our debts as we forgive those who are indebted to us. As the chapter concludes, it is a call for us to forgive a sister or a brother from the heart. The fifth and final discourse is perhaps the most challenging. We know where it concludes at the end of chapter 25. But scholars are divided as to how much of chapters 23 and 24 should be included. If the first discourse was about blessings of the kingdom of heaven, this last discourse is about how Christians will suffer for the kingdom. Chapter 23 includes Jesus' denunciation of the scribes and Pharisees for their hypocrisy. It concludes with Jesus weeping over Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. Chapter 24 describes the false prophets who will come in the name of Christ, leading people astray. Jesus also predicts wars, famine, earthquakes, his followers being arrested, tried, and killed. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. Amid all this will come the Son of Man in glory, as announced in the prophet Daniel, gathering the elect from the four winds for the great moment of judgment. There are then a series of parables on the seeming delay of the coming of the Son of Man. The servant who eats and drinks his master's supplies, thinking that he may not return. Yet at the moment he least expects it, the master returns as judge. And the parable of the 10 virgins waiting for the bridegroom, the wise virgins with the oil in their lamps and the foolish ones without. And the parable of the master who entrusts talents to his servants and goes away. What does each servant do with the talents entrusted to him? Finally, in Matthew 25, the great parable of judgment, separating the sheep from the goats. How does the Lord judge us? I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. As often as you did this to the least of my brothers and sisters, you did this to me. And so Jesus concludes his fifth instruction with the dramatic teaching on the end of time. All the cosmic violence and earthly conflict associated with final judgment comes down to a simple question. How did we treat the least among us? In our next video, we will look at a key moment in the gospel, Peter's confession of faith at Caesarea Philippi.